Error occurred. Oh, that's fun.
Mine says that we're live. We're live and
Oh,
I yeah,
here
we're
we go. It says we're live now.
yeah.
All right. I think LinkedIn had a little bit of a delay, but looks like everything is good. We're good to go. Um, give people some time to find us. Last week, I sent you a text, Nuffy.
Yeah, that's so funny, dude.
Last week, thank goodness for CB. I don't know if he'll be on today, but he or she, I'm not quite sure. But I couldn't believe it. I was talking for about 3 minutes, doing the prep, letting everybody know what we're going to talk about today, yada yada yada, and I was on mute the entire time.
Lady.
The
That's
entire time.
amazing.
Yeah. So apologies to those of you that had to sit through that last week, or if you tried to click on to the recording and you were like, she's not saying anything, and probably bounced to on to something else. I understand. Slight malfunction. My partner in crime, my friend, my accomplice, Snuffy G, is back, but she wasn't here last week to help me get myself prepared. So, so glad to have you back, buddy.
See, you need me. You need me.
I do. I do. We need our community. We need our friends for sure.
We need
Um,
each other.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was funny. But I'm really glad that somebody commented and jumped in and said, "Hey, you might want to press that unmute button."
Cause that could have gone on longer.
Oh, for sure. And I'd have been so upset because I wasn't going to do it again.
You're like, no, sorry.
It would have been a
Hope
loss.
everyone relapse.
Yep, exactly. But for those of you that are joining us today, September 14th, thank you. We are back. Snuffy G is here. I just got back from a little bit of a break. I think I mentioned last week, for those of you that saw the live or caught the recording, my voice was a little tired last week. So I got a chance to take a break, get some sun, and I'm back and I feel much better. So
Yes.
I'm ready to rock and roll. And the news has been mostly about the passing of Queen Elizabeth the second. And while I was away, I was obviously still tuned into, like, that was such a big news topic. I was tuned into what was going on there, um, observing how people were responding and remembering her, um, and then trying to figure out, well, how do we want to do it from Trella's perspective today? How do we want to, talk about the topic, and not ignore it? But I think, Snuffy, you and I were talking about this before we got on. Um, you want to remember not just the positives. You want to remember the entire story. But I think what was happening was that some people were, you know, putting everything on Queen Elizabeth II, and I'm not saying that she was perfect by any means, but they were, kind of celebrating her death. I never really understood the celebration of anyone's passing. When we caught Osama bin Laden, everybody was excited, and I was like, doesn't really bring anybody back. I mean, I don't feel like that's justice. Like, I'm not a death penalty type of person.
Right. Same. Same.
It doesn't bring people back. It doesn't correct the wrongs. It doesn't get rid of the systemic issues. It doesn't cause new beliefs and new ways of doing things when someone passes away. But it does create a moment for people to remember. So I wanted to try to remember from Trella's perspective when it comes to food insecurity and food scarcity, what happened back in the day around that, and what caused a friction between not just a lot of the African colonies, because, Great Britain had a lot of colonization in Africa, but I also wanted to know what happened in Ireland, um, as well. And one of the reasons why I went in that direction, I can recall when I went to South Africa several years ago, and we took a tour of Robben Island, which is where Nelson Mandela was held as prisoner for, gosh, I can't even, over 20 years. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It was a long time.
So when you go to Robben Island and you get on the ferry that takes you there, there's like this like little small museum, and it talks about apartheid, which was basically, uh, a system where they created different skin color and classes based on skin color. So you had white, colored, black, and a lot of the colored and African people were just treated horribly in their own land, which is the reason why Nelson Mandela was an activist and did everything that he did to try to fight back against that system. Nonetheless, in this little museum, it showed that there was some participation from the people of Ireland in helping, from an activist perspective, helping the Africans gain back their control and their sovereignty and their freedom from the apartheid system. And I was surprised. I didn't know that like the Irish people were active for, in support of African freedom and Black people. It was news to me as an adult. And I thought to myself, well, what happened in America? Because I don't see that same support from the Irish culture to the Black culture here in America. What happened? So it got me to doing some thinking, and um, I wound up going down the path of the Great Famine. So why were the Irish people upset? Let's go back to that, and then found out that what happened to them in Ireland caused the immigration to America, and then also wanted to know, okay, so once they got to America, what caused them to forget and embrace their colonizer? Because you came
Right.
to America and you basically embraced the colonizer. So we're going to go through that today. Denise is here. I know you've got some perspectives from the Irish culture that you want to share with everybody. Um, my wife is a Caucasian with Irish culture, and her mother. I'm going to be talking to her a little bit about this too when I get a chance to connect with her again. But this stuff it all boils down to power and money. So we're going to walk through that together today. It's going to be a little bit of a different type of live. I mean, in the past, we've been talking about climate resilience and climate change and the water shortages. And we want to talk about food scarcity today. And we also want to talk about the politics behind it and how it changes people's lives, where they live, and how they treat one another. So, Snuffy, I'll pause because I know you're only um, audio today. So I need to pause to let you jump in.
Yeah. And sorry everybody, I'm in a space where the Wi-Fi is very low. I feel like I'm back in the 19 somethings. Um, but yeah, it's interesting when we're talking about like what made um, people coming over here and embrace the colonizer. I just started thinking of like almost like Stockholm syndrome, right? If you don't assimilate, if you don't like listen, then that's your only way of survival. So I think it turns into survival techniques too of trying to fit in because if you don't, you're the outcast and things are for the basic human needs that you need. And we'll talk more about it, but the Irish were able to because they present as white, so they were easily able to kind of and embrace the colonizer, or I don't know. I think I just see it as almost like survival techniques for everybody when you go to a new place, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's lots of history of that for all different types of cultures and races, et cetera, going somewhere and then assimilating for survival. And it's hard to judge because you're like, I don't, if I was in that, you would hope that you wouldn't be the person that would do that in that
Right,
situation, but you don't really know that.
right.
So I try to give everybody grace, um, and try to understand the context. But I don't want to make that an excuse for continued BS. So don't
Right.
don't
And
get,
and
don't get it
and
twisted.
yeah, and I think that goes to our point that we were talking about before. It's like we're repeating some things that we should know better not to repeat. because we know about its past and some of the trauma, yet we still continue to repeat it for greed, power, and affluence and money and all of it. So we don't really learn from any of our mistakes, unfortunately, except for
Yeah,
those who are aware of it, like you and I
and others. Yeah.
and others.
But for those that are just maybe for the first time checking us out, joining us, my name is Aja. I'm the CEO of Trella Technologies, and I have with me Snuffy G. She's audio only today. A team member of Trella, a friend, and an accomplice in this mission to grow what we want, where we want, and to maintain sovereignty with through food, plant medicine, etc. Um, but one of the other reasons why I wanted to go down this kind of history path today is because I'm a risk engineer by training. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, but I'm a risk engineer by training. That was what I've done for over about 17 years. And the main thing with risk engineering is trying to figure out how to avoid something disastrous happening. So the best way to do that is to look in the past, look behind you, and look for patterns that you can recognize in the present that will give you a clue if something bad is going to happen. Um, and that's I think I'm naturally like I excelled in that industry because that's just naturally how my brain works. Is I want to know what happened in the past. I want to be able to recognize those patterns so it doesn't happen again in the future. And for me, when it comes to famine and trying to figure out like how does the food get moved around, who controls it, how do you avoid it happening, you have to go back, you have to look in history. So I wanted to also go back, not just because of you know learning about the relationship between uh, Black Americans and Irish Americans, and then and why Irish Americans were kind of forced to move to America in a different way that Black Americans were. It wasn't so much about that. It was also about, well, how can you find out like who's controlling the food in these examples, and are they doing it again? And how can we be aware of that in the in the present day, so that we can watch out for our communities and make sure that we don't wind up getting it done again. And unfortunately, it's happening right now. And you see a lot of news media about Africa and India and Pakistan and all these eastern countries that are dealing with food shortages, but these things can happen here in the U.S. As well, and they happen in European countries. They've happened in Ukraine. So we're going to today look at Ireland back in the day, the Great Potato Famine, and see what happened there. So thanks for joining in. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to put those in. And we'll try to throw them up on the screen and answer them. But again, we're going to go through this. We're learning too. This is new information for not just us but everyone. I think one of the things we were talking about too, Denise, is um, the amount of information we don't know is
Mm,
incredible.
yeah,
We don't know anything. Like literally, we don't know anything.
yeah,
You could be a scholar that reads, you know, let's say a book a week or 4 books a week, because there's some people that can really get through them. And there's no way that you're going to know everything. There's no such thing. I mean, we were talking about I said let's pull up, like, let's think about it from a mathematical perspective. Um, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. 4.5 billion years old. That's how long the Earth has been here for.
that's crazy.
4.5 billion. Imagine that in dollars. So imagine a person that has 4.5 billion dollars in their wealth, in their kind of balance sheet. And then imagine somebody who only has $600. Now I say $600 because we've only really been privy to history for about the last like the majority of us. There's people that go 10,000 years back that study like ancient Egyptian history. But the majority of the population in school, in high school, and in college, they're really only going to tell you from like 1400 forward, the year 1400 forward. So I'm going to say about 600 years of information is what the majority of people are privy to easily. So one person has $600, other person has $4.5 billion. That's the difference in knowledge that we're missing. Like we don't know um, almost anything. Even if you were to read everything for that 600-year time frame, you still wouldn't know. And the majority of people, especially in America or the United States, read only a minuscule fraction of that 600 years, that know a minuscule fraction of that 600 years. Some people only know what happened during their lifetime. So we have a very, very small history. And I think that's the reason why, Snuffy, these things keep happening to us again and again and again, is because we don't have the past experience. We don't have that knowledge to recognize those patterns to stop it from happening again. So today, hang out with us. We're going to look at some stuff from back in the day and see if we can find some patterns. That's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do. So
that's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do. So we're talking about the potato famine. And I kind of color coded some of the stuff here. I'm going to go through it, not kind of fast because I don't want to lose people, but I want you to just kind of walk away with a few different things in three different kind of categories. The first is the orange. What happened to the potatoes? Why was there a famine in the first place? What caused the famine? That's the orange. The yellow will be what happened to the people and why were they forced to migrate away from Ireland, and how did that process kind of take place? So that's the migration part, the yellow. And then the blue is going to be what happened to them in America once they got here. So we're going for orange is what happened to the potatoes, yellow is what happened to force the migration, and then blue is what happened once they landed in America. Follow me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Snuffy, for being my sounding board. So, thank you. So, this potato famine started back in 1845 and 1855. More than 1.5 million adults and children left Ireland to seek refuge in America. Most were desperately poor, and many were suffering from starvation and disease. They left because diseases had devastated the Ireland's potato crops, leaving millions without food. Let's dig into what happened there a little bit more. First up, Ireland was not industrialized. They didn't have a substantial industry. Mostly everything that they had was agriculturally based. In 1835, 3/4 of the Irish laborers had no regular employment, and they could only live and support their family by growing a little bit. And they only had small patches of land. They had potatoes. Now, we'll get into this a little bit more about why they only had small patches of land. But they could only grow potatoes on these very small patches of land. And potatoes were unique in many ways. You could grow potatoes in wet ground. You could grow them on mountainsides where other plants could not be cultivated. So they were able to be grown in these conditions, but almost 40% of the people had a diet that consisted of entirely potatoes. And those potatoes, they could only be stored for 1 year. So you had to grow potatoes consistently every year in this climate. So if something happened to the potato crop, people were out of luck. There was nothing that you could do to replace it. So this brings up to mind what we talk about at Trella about diversifying the types of plants that we want to grow, is because you really don't want to rely on just one type of food system, on one type of food. And in this case, because of the politics and the history of the time, they were forced to only grow potatoes because they only had access to the land that would allow them to grow something like potatoes. So diversification of crops is key. That's what I'm learning from that. In November, the Scientific Commission reported that 1/2 of the actual potato crop of Ireland is either destroyed or remains in a state unfit for the food of man. By 1846, the panic began to spread and food supplies disappeared. And people ate anything they could find, including leaves, bark of trees, even grass. I even heard stories of people eating dirt. I'll pause a little bit if you want to jump in while I get to this next, because I wanted to talk about the actual disease.
Yeah, I don't even know. I don't even know how And at this point, right, Britain is ruling over Ireland, right? All of
18,
Ireland, not just
1801.
northern. It's all of it, right?
Yeah, 1801. Great Britain is in charge of Ireland.
Interesting.
So here's what happened to the crop. Something called phytophthora. Phytophthora. I had to look that up how to pronounce that the right way. Infested the potato plants and caused rapid decay. And it started in the United States in the summer of 1843. It spread to Belgium. So here we go again. Something starts in one
You're
country.
welcome. You're
Yeah,
welcome, everybody.
something starts in one country, spreads to another through cargo, and in Flanders and Normandy and Holland and southern England. And by August of 1845, the blight was recorded in Dublin. And a week later, a total failure of crop was reported in one entire county. By October, there was panic in the west of Ireland as the blight destroyed healthy potatoes harvested in August. So spread fast, and spread through multiple countries. Now, I think we have different things in place now to help. Like you can't ship food. Like I can't bring food or plants into the country very easily, but there are still ways for that stuff to spread.
Right.
So again, being aware of what you're bringing into the country, not breaking those restrictions. I guess to some extent they make sense for things like this.
I mean, I can't even bring firewood from Massachusetts up to Maine. I have to buy Maine firewood because of, whatever we have down here. They don't want it to get into their forestry up there. So
Hmm.
it's interesting, even statewide, and what you can bring into certain states.
Yeah, I can believe it. So that's what happened to the potatoes. A disease called phytophthora came in, started in the U.S., moved around a couple different countries, wound up in Ireland, and all the other countries were able to kind of deal with it because they had diversification of crops and they had access to those different types of crops within that country. So what happened particularly in Ireland that made it so bad? Because all these other countries experienced it, but Ireland was the one that suffered the most. So let's get into that. The potato famine killed, now I'm on the yellow part. The potato famine killed more than 1 million people in 5 years and generated great bitterness and anger at the British for providing too little help to their Irish subjects, because by 1801, Britain was ruling Ireland. The immigrants who reached America settled in Boston, New York, and other cities. So we'll get into that a little bit more as well. But most of the large and productive farms were owned by English Protestants who collected rent and lived abroad. Similar. Many owners visited their property only once or twice in their lifetime, and the properties were managed by some middlemen who set up the farms and divided them into smaller and smaller chunks.
Airbnbs.
In the years before 1845, many committees and commissions had issued reports on the state of Ireland, and all predicted this disaster. So they were aware that something like this could happen, and probably were aware and probably knew, like, we only grow a certain type of crop. We're very susceptible to this. Many Irish believe that the British government should have done more to help Ireland during the famine. Ireland had become part of Great Britain in 1801, and the British Parliament sitting in London knew about the horrors that were being suffered. So let me jump to another one here that talks about exporting. They were exporting stuff. So I said before that 40% of the people were growing potatoes. So what was going on with the rest? So throughout the entire period of the famine, Ireland was exporting enormous amounts of quantities of food to England. In Ireland before and after the famine, this person points out, although the potato crop failed, the country was still producing and exporting more than enough grain crops to feed the population. But that was a money crop and not a food crop and could not be interfered with. Up to 75% of Irish soil was devoted to wheat, oats, barley, and other crops that were grown for export and shipped abroad while the people starved. So Irish people, they actually, this is their land. They're colonized. They're forced south. They can only grow in a terrain that's pretty hard to grow on. So they start growing potatoes. Um, Meanwhile, on other arable land, people are growing money crops like cannabis, wheat, oats, barley, other crops that were grown for export and shipped abroad. And they couldn't get access to this food. Why
Mm-hmm.
couldn't they get access to this food?
Tale of this time, Asia.
Tale
Greed.
told this time. Yeah, it is. I mean, these things are happening in different ways, but similarly, they're happening today. Um, so food exports were stopped. By stopping food exports, um, the stopping of food exports was not acceptable to the Whig Party, which had taken control of the British Parliament in 1846. The Whigs believed in laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is a French word meaning let do or let it alone. Laissez-faire economics believed that the state should not get in the way of transactions between private parties. Instead, the government should interfere as little as possible in the economy. Because of their belief in laissez-faire economics, members of the Whig government refused to stop landlords from exporting their oats and grain while the poor people starved. The Whig Party also shut down food depots that had been set up and stocked with Indian corn.
I mean, you were talking before how almost some of a certain party in this country are almost trying to do a laissez-faire thought process, but are actually really double standard the whole thing when it comes to women's bodies or what they'll allow won't allow to do. And I just want to make one little point too. Like we all thought the Hunger Games was a fictional thing, but if you think about it and really look at it, it's basically based in history. You can grow it, but you can't touch it, and you're going to be poor while we keep on feeding the rich. So it's always on the backs of poor people.
Yeah, it was set up that way by design. By design, unfortunately. Um, so I think that was it that I had for the yellow. Let me just double check. Um, just one last part. The Great Hunger from 1845 to 1849, that was no issue has provoked so much anger or so embittered relations between the two countries of England and Ireland as the indisputable fact that huge quantities of food were exported from Ireland to England throughout the period when the people of Ireland were dying of starvation.
Let them eat
So
cake.
So what do you do if you don't have any food? You have to migrate, you have to move to find the food. So that starts this leaving for America portion right here. So driven by panic and desperation, a flood of immigrants left Ireland in 1847. Now this I thought was interesting how they got here, crossing borders. Let's talk about that because we see that happening now. And I think again, this is another example of people being forced to leave. They don't want to leave. Their families are there. Their culture is there, but because the conditions have gotten so unbearable, they're forced to leave, and not in safe, healthy ways. Like they're putting their lives at risk, and many of them died trying to flee. We have examples of people doing that right now. And again, this is so now they're fleeing to America, which is basically at this point by the 1840s, the American Revolution is taking place, but the English culture is still there. I mean, you've got, and this is something I just learned from listening to Karen Hunter and in the class with Carr about the naming of a lot of the eastern states of New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, anything that is along the eastern state that has the word new in front of it has an English origin. It was, a town when before the American Revolution, and England was, splicing up sections of the United States or America at the time. They were naming things after their rulers, after their royal blood. So you've got New York, New Hampshire. It's all English territory that they're now fleeing from. So I found it just kind of ironic that the English are, have pushed these people into an area where they can't grow a diverse variety of crops. Something happens to that, the one crop they can grow, and the people that could help them, the English, don't. So now they're fleeing to another new version of England. It's such like it all kind of ties back to Great Britain, which is the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic, because we're talking about it today in the remembrance of Queen Elizabeth II. But anyway, but because fares on the Canadian ships were cheaper than, coming straight to New York, many immigrants went by way of Canada and walked across the borders into Maine, and some of them south all the way into New England. So you have people coming into Canada, walking down into Maine, New England, and in Boston and New York, we have a very huge Irish culture, and that's how that migration happened. It came through Canada. It didn't just all land on Staten Island like some people might have thought. Hundreds of poor people, men, women, and children of all ages, from the driveling idiot of 90 to the babe just born. Now, this is a quote. Huddled together without air, wallowing in filth and breathing a fetid atmosphere, sick in body, dispirited in heart, dying without a voice of spiritual consolation, and buried in deep without the rights of the church. Sorry.
Mhm.
So these are people that are starving, unhealthy, uneducated, weak, angry, extremely angry. Imagine desperate, and they're all flocking into this new world, looking for something to save them. But
Mm.
we, despite the people that claim to be Christians and follow the Bible, the big lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah is that not being nice to people that are immigrating to your land will anger the God. That's what that story is really about, is being not being nice to people who are visiting your country. It's there's an actual, like, that's the actual part of Sodom and Gomorrah that doesn't get really, I think, taught as well as it should be, because again, in this supposed Protestant country where people are immigrating in, the Irish immigrants were not well liked and were often treated badly. The large number of new arrivals strained the city's resources. 37,000 Irish immigrants arrived in Boston in 1847, increasing the city's population by more than 30%.
Zoinks.
Many unskilled workers feared being put out of work by Irish immigrants willing to work for less than the going rate. Similar thing in the past, similar thing happening again. How do we create systems that stops this type of stuff from happening? Well, this example is colonizers going into different countries and causing havoc so that people have to flee. In South America, Central America, similarly, we have America and other countries dabbling in the governments of these countries, causing problems, funding drug wars, giving out weapons, and causing people to have to flee. It's happening right now. The press described Irish immigrants as aliens who were mindlessly loyal to their Catholic leaders. As anti-Irish and anti-Catholic sentiment grew, newspaper advertisements for jobs and housing routinely ended with the statement, "No Irish need apply." So they didn't come here feeling the love, because they were different and they were going to take up resources. But by 1860, suddenly, not really suddenly, we'll talk about that. By 1860, with the advent of the Civil War, America's attention shifted to the issue of slavery, and discrimination against the Irish began to decline, because it is now even more us against them. Us against them. Here's some examples. We'll talk about that. Let me find it. Thanks for your patience. And this will segue me into that a little bit. So this was another interesting thing. During that period, 1845 to 1850, Britain's total expenditure in Ireland was about 7 million pounds, or 0.01% of its GDP. But in the previous decade, the British government was willing to give slaveholders in the West Indies, so in the Caribbean, they were willing to give slaveholders 20 million pounds as compensation for ending slavery. Now, that to me is just mind blowing that they gave more money to not to the slaves, not to compensate the slaves for their work. This is the reason why reparations comes back up time and time and time again, was because other people have been repaired. The slaveholders have been repaired by America, by England, by all these other countries, but not the actual slaves or the descendants of those slaves. And they did it they did it more so than actually funding the people that they were supposed to be colonizing in Ireland. So it has nothing to do, in my opinion, this is an example where it's about power, because they only want to compensate the powerful, those that are in power, the slaveholders. They don't want to compensate people who are the same skin color as them that don't have as much as them. They let them die. So to me, this was an example of how it's all about power and keeping those happy, that are willing to allow you to stay in power.
Right.
So I found this article from The Root, and it talks about a few different books. I mean, there's so much out there that you can read. I know you were talking about this, Snuffy, about fiction versus nonfiction. I don't know if you want to go into that. Did I lose you, Snuff?
Yeah, I'm going in and out. Sorry, buddy.
Oh,
It's going in and out.
that's okay. I was talking about fiction versus nonfiction, and there's so much history out there that we could be reading. I know there's, it's fun to read nonfiction from time to time and have a little bit of fun, but there's so much history out there that will let you know people that did the research, what happened and why. And in this book, the Renegade History of the United States, this author Thaddeus Russell explains that the first large wave of Irish immigrants worked low-paying jobs, mostly building the canals along the Canadian border. And we talked about that. People came through Canada and came down south. So it made sense that they're going to work at the Canadian border, doing the work that other Americans wouldn't do. Let's see. Then he says, the Irish were simultaneously accused of stealing all the good jobs and branded as lazy and shiftless. They were also thought to be, and this is key, they were also thought to be the non-white missing link between superior Europeans and the savage African, based on stereotypes from early American media.
Media.
I always wondered, like, why was it that JFK was so hated? Because he was Irish Catholic, and you watch some of these shows like Peaky Blinders or Boardwalk Empire, and you see a little bit of that whole Protestant versus Catholic strife. And this is an example of it again. And this is where those shows get it from. There was that kind of disconnect between, you're not Anglo-Saxon. I mean, I think if you spoke to these neo-Nazis and these people who think of a pure race, Catholic is not part of it.
And there is no pure race.
There's that as well.
I mean, to be clear.
Yeah, unless you were the first woman born in Africa, which is now Ethiopia, Eritrea area. Unless you were her, she's the only thing, and that does not exist anymore. We've melded, we've mixed, I just really wish we could get past this. And I know people say, well, why do you bring it up? Why do you talk about it? Why are you talking about race? Because it needs to be clarified so that we can get past it. You can't just keep acting like it doesn't exist. We have to get through this stuff. We have to learn what happened in the past so we understand that this is all about division. These things are made up. The term white is made up. I was on a conference call about a couple years ago when George Floyd was murdered, and people were starting to put their race or their on their like profiles on Zoom calls. Like it would say their name, their pronoun, and then what did you consider your race to be? Which I was just kind of like, all right, because people were putting white, and I'm like, you don't understand what that means. I think I think you
Right.
think that's the right way to do this, but you don't know the history of the term and how it was defined and why it was created, legally created, legally created. Don't believe me? Look it up. You wouldn't use that term. So here, let's get into that.
And can
Go ahead.
and I just want to say something too. Why does race keep be brought up? Well, because you are putting so much importance on it. You're saying, this is because of you. This is in response to you, not you, obviously, Asia, but to the broader, like, well, you keep bringing it up. You keep creating it as an issue. Your your fakeness. Like, what are you doing? So of course we're going to continue to talk about it. You don't even know your own whiteness. You don't even know your own history. So just stop. And I'm sorry, but we're going to keep on talking about it until there's equity across the board where you don't think that you're supreme over anybody else. So we're going to keep on talking, and people are going to get used to it because we haven't talked about it for so long, and this is where we are. We don't know the history of anything. We think we do, or we create this own history in our own minds to make ourselves feel better about whatever it is you don't feel good about. So, and there's no excuse. We talked earlier, Asia. There's no excuse for you not to have the knowledge. It's not like you're waiting for your new subscription of the Britannica, the Encyclopedia Britannica, to show up at your door. There's a nice little thing called the internet. It's not going to change until more people know things and really know things, not through their little, white eyes, but through the multicultural lens that is the world.
Yeah,
That's it. That's all I got.
I feel you. I mean, I feel like people that say, "Why do you keep bringing up race?" It's like, well, do you consider yourself to be white? Oh, yeah. Well, that's why. Because you're going by this
Yeah,
term.
that's why.
You consider yourself to be separate from humanity based on the color of your skin. So we have to talk about that. Why are you separating yourself from humanity based on the color of your skin?
Right. Right.
But is there a benefit to that? Well, no. Okay, let's
Yes.
go back in history.
Well, in
We
some,
believe
in,
there was.
right.
There were
Right.
actual laws that said a white person, a black person, or a person of African descent could not take a white person to court. I couldn't sue you because the color of your skin. You could do whatever you wanted to do to me. I couldn't file a complaint against you. The ultimate privilege, safety,
Yeah. All made up.
all made up. And why? Because of division. And when did that term come into play? After people of different color got together and did a rebellion. The very one of the very largest rebellions that we had during African slavery was a combination of poor European immigrants and African enslaved persons. They got together, they caused havoc, and the government said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! We can't have these people coming together like this. We gotta figure something out." And voila, some people are white and some people are not. And it depends on whether or not you want to uphold the system and play by the rules. So here we go. Let's learn about that a little bit more. In 1840, at the beginning of the Great Wave of Irish immigration, there was only a handful of Irish police officers on the force. By the end of the year, Irish made up more than 1/4 of the New York City Police Department. And by the end of the century, more than half the city's police and more than half of the city's police and more than 75% of its firefighters were Irish Americans. So, what do? They give you access to jobs of privilege, law enforcement. Also, a lot of these people went down south to be overseers or to be slave hunt, like to capture runaway slaves. They put them in positions of power over somebody else so that they felt good about themselves. You assimilate now. However, while white skin made the Irish eligible for membership in the white race, it did not guarantee their admission. They had to earn it. The Sons of Ireland gained their white status by joining the fight against abolition and uniting in the suppression of blacks, embracing the oldest American tradition of them all, racism, which means
You can't fight them, join them.
there you go. You can't fight with them, join them because they won't let you. We're going to give you privilege and make you feel better, and then now you assimilate, and you can because your skin color allows you to do so. You change your hair, change your culture, change your name. A lot of people did that. Change your name, change your culture, change the way you speak, and shit on some other people, and we'll let you in.
Yeah. If you hate who I hate, then we're good.
While the Irish American repealers maintained a pride and love for their homeland, they acted unabashedly American in the way they dealt with the slavery controversy. So this is what we talked about before about assimilation and survival tactics. I mean, you look at it as a whole, the system as a whole, and it's infuriating. You're like, this has to be stopped. We have to figure out how to stop this. You look at it on the individual level, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I can sympathize and I can see why somebody would do that. Why somebody would want to survive and just say, well, I'll just play along. And these aren't people of strong character. I would hope that I wouldn't do the same. I would hope that my character would be able to like make it through that. But this is thanks, Matt. Hey. I don't know if we can bring that up. Thanks, Matt. It's great to learn about real history things because you state repeats itself over and over. It's the only way to be aware and have perspective. The things you talk about are still happening to this day. Thank you, Matt. I'm glad that somebody is seeing that this is all about identifying patterns and trying to learn from it. And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't want to take the time or just feel like it's too uncomfortable. And I get it. I mean, I don't want to spend my days talking about this, but I can't ignore it any longer. I can't ignore it. I live with I live and get along with people of all different types of backgrounds, cultures, etc. So I don't understand why people can't do it too.
Same.
And so I started learning about it and researching it and trying to figure it out and reading books. And then I started to understand it's all about division and power. And to keep those in power that are in place and keep us all divided. So please, if you want people to stop talking about racism, stop calling yourself white. That's what I'll say. But thanks for joining us, man. I'm glad you joined. You jumped in. He and I know each other. Used to work with each other. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Denise, did you want to add anything before we move on?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I know your audio is a little in and out and choppy. Hopefully next week we'll have that squared away. We do it every Wednesday. We go live. If you want to learn more about what we do, our mission to grow what we want, where we want for everybody, because everybody needs to do this, and because sometimes people in power won't do it for us, as we just went through today. Please check us out and learn what we're about. Our mission to grow what we want, where we want. Are you ready? Are you ready for the impacts of climate change, environment, the politics behind all this? You may or may not be. So go to Trella.io. That's Trella.io up at the top. And you can check out our website. Click on and see what we're about, some of the news, what our products are, what our services are, etc. And also don't forget, you can still become an investor in Trella Technologies. We're taking investment from the public. We are supported by the global community, as we mentioned right here. We are backed by a global community of people from all different parts of the world giving as little as $250, not giving, but investing as little as $250 to become an investor, and supporting our cause, putting some, getting some skin in the game and having some ownership, some equity as a result of that. So please check us out as well. And all right, is that it, Snuff? We're good?
I think that's it. See you next week, everybody.
See you next week. Mad peace, mad love. Later.